So how about we move on to our main topic of
And now for something completely different.
tonight we're going to do a prepping overview. So this could have gone a lot of different ways, but we're not going to go the Discovery Channel Doomsday Prepper route. We're not going to tell you about...
I wanted to give everyone a tour of my bunker.
You haven't even shown me your bunker, man.
Oops.
Oh, man, I so want a bunker.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, we're not going to go too deep in the weeds on this to get into too many specifics. More of just an overview on mindset.
yeah, absolutely. Mindset and some practical things. Because I don't think it's about the sensational things, although that can make pretty good TV. That's the sort of thing that can reel you in. Zombie apocalypse are very fun as long as they're not actually happening.
Yeah, that's right.
But we get a lot of entertainment out of that, of course. But what does actually being prepared in our day-to-day lives mean? Something I've definitely noticed is that people aren't really prepared for any type of disruption to their lives. For the most part, any little disruption can be a total curveball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that's the important thing to point out is that the end of the world, quotation marks, can be a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It doesn't mean necessarily the zombies are coming. It can mean you lose your job, or there's a natural disaster, or something like that, right? That in the microcosm of a person's life or a family's life, that is the end of the world in some respect, if you want to use that phraseology. And so the preparedness isn't just for the most extreme potential for disaster. The prepping or preparedness needs to be for all of the potentialities, which can be very mild. Power goes out because there's a bad snowstorm. Probably not going to kill you, but might be pretty uncomfortable, and there's potential damage there if you're not ready for it. And I think the key is to have the mindset of to be resilient in just mentally how you're going to deal with that, as well as practical. But you can have all the tools in the world, and if you panic and freak out, when the thing actually happens, the tools aren't going to really do you much good. So that certainly is an aspect of mindset.
Yeah. So mentioning the snowstorm, that's a really good point, because that's something we definitely know we're going to face. So to me, it makes a lot of sense to focus on the things that you're going to face or have a high likelihood of happening. Zombies overrunning my property, probably not going to happen. I'm not going to spend a lot of time preparing for that, but losing power for a week, that's a possibility that could be very uncomfortable, potentially life-threatening, depending on how bad a blizzard got. If not life-threatening, then at the very least you're going to be uncomfortable. Maybe you'll suffer some losses, like my pipes could freeze up, and then where am I going to be?
Well, we had that happen not very long ago. It was only a few years ago. Hurricane Arthur rolled up the east coast of the United States and Canada. And, in our area, we were out of power for almost a week. I know some people were out of power for a couple weeks almost. I think of all the food we have stored in freezers and refrigerators and all that kind of stuff. If I hadn't had a generator to keep that going, and a stockpile of gas to keep the generator going, we would have lost thousands of dollars of food that, for the average family, that's a big hit. That's a big loss.
Absolutely. That would definitely be one of the things that would concern me most. Is definitely losing power to keep the freezers running. So
yeah, of course, there's a solution. If you just don't store food, well, you can't lose it.
That is true, but it leads us to another problem. Without food, well, let's see. I mean, you could last the week where you have no power without food. But what if the trucks stop coming to the grocery store with your food and you go to the grocery store every 2 or 3 days? This is something that could easily happen. Or maybe you just lose the ability to take yourself to the store. It's like maybe your vehicle is broken, or maybe gas is super expensive and you can't go as much. Do you have any plan for basic food supplies?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and again, we see all of these things happen, but in a microcosm, and they happen for such a short little blip that we don't really, you know, I think a lot of people don't really extend that to a wider outage because it's usually a small localized disturbance. So we're going to get a really bad storm, and they say, "Listen, people, you're not going to be on the roads. Everything's going to be closed." Well, people run out and they buy up all the milk and bread and storm chips.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. But it's only lasts a few days, and it's inconvenient for a couple days if you need milk, bread, or chips. But then it's over, and then everything's restocked, and everything's back to normal. It's a minor inconvenience because it's a very localized event.
So we live in a world where we've made things so efficient that we really don't have any resiliency. I think you see that in the supply chains. Nobody keeps inventory. It's expensive to keep inventory. And if you can always have it delivered tomorrow or 2 days from now, or maybe even a week, or if it's coming on a regular schedule, you don't need to have inventory. So most stores, and we're going to maybe focus on grocery stores here because food is really important. It's not something you can do without it. You can get away with maybe not getting another pair of tires or hardware, different things. But food is something people need to keep coming. So how do we deal with a system that has no resiliency in it?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, and just another thing on that point, it's probably the thing that people are the worst at actually preparing for in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And I think it's because, like you say, because of that sort of on-time delivery system, we live in a pretty safe, easy society. We don't really need to worry about food for the winter because we're no longer stuck in a homestead 50 miles from town all winter. But yeah, so preparing for it, obviously, storage of the things that you would consume regularly is obviously the first thing that people go to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's just sort of the mentality of store what you eat and eat what you store.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to the store to buy, your week's worth of groceries, you buy that extra little bit, and over time, that builds up into a bit of a stockpile, so to speak, of extra food.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to look at it that way and just build up a supply of common staples. I mean, obviously, you can't have a big supply of produce necessarily unless you set up for that, but there's not really any reason people couldn't have a decent supply of dry goods. Flour, beans, rice, pasta is probably one of the most popular ones actually that people stock up on.
Well, those things store so well. I mean, if you store those properly, they'll store for 30 years if you do it right.
Yeah, definitely have no trouble sitting for a year on your shelf. And if you do a first in, last out, I think that's what you call it, isn't it? You kind of have that rotation of supplies. So when you buy something, you kind of add it to the back of your supply and take the oldest stuff out. And that way you continually have maybe a couple months supply. Does that sound reasonable? Or should someone shoot for more than 2 months of food on hand?
I think it depends on where people are at. I mean, for some people, a week would be a good start.
That's true.
Everybody's starting at a different place, and so I think the first thing you do, and even the government tells people to have a week's worth of food and emergency supplies. So you start with that, a week, and then you extend that to 2 weeks, and you extend that to, and you just keep going. I think having 30 to 60 days should be your initial sort of goal to push for. Yeah, and 30 days isn't an unreasonable amount of time to have food on hand for, because the thing I hear a lot from people is, well, I live in a small house, or I live in an apartment. I don't have a lot of space. And so people do have to get creative about how they do it. But even 30 days, I think that's pretty reasonable, even for an apartment. I mean, store your cans of beans under the bed kind of thing. Who cares where it is?
Yeah, or in a Rubbermaid tote at the bottom of the closet, or find some space.
Yeah, that's right.
So I would say food is definitely one of the biggest ones. Access to water is definitely pretty important as well. If you have no backup plan at all and you're totally reliant on municipal water, for example, that's not a great situation. So if you have no water at all in your dwelling and the water doesn't come out of the faucet, what do you do then? This is one reason I'm very glad I don't live in a city, because you don't have a lot of options in that kind of setting. There's no water source you can find anywhere.
Yeah, you're not going down to the creek,
No.
Generally to get some water. You're not jerry-rigging something up to bring it out of a well or what have you. Yeah, water's one of the places I think that this saying is the most applicable. Always have three ways to get everything you need. And
okay, so explain what that means.
So, okay, I'll give you an example. At my house, so I have a well with a pump in it, and I have electricity in my house. So that's one way to get water. The second way that I can get water would be to go down to the pond at the end of my property, scoop out a bucket of water, filter it, and then I have water. The third way to get water, obviously I have a generator. I include having a generator to run my pump as part of the first. But you could call that a second or a third item as well. And then another example would be having a length of pipe or a hand pump, some sort of way to manually pull water out of your well without the use of an electric pump. So I have three or four ways to acquire water. So I have a sort of what's the saying? Overlapping fields of fire, so to speak, when it comes to acquiring water that aren't all dependent upon this one device, a pump that could fail or have the power go out. Then my generator breaks. That worst case scenario where everything that can go wrong does go wrong. So if you have sort of multiple layers, 2 is 1, 1 is none mentality, you have backups to your backups. And it doesn't mean, I need to have 3 pumps on hand, and 3 generators on hand. It means I have low tech, I have layers of technology that give me resiliency in acquiring what I need to acquire. And that applies to all aspects of being prepared, or should. Water is just one of the ones I think that's the easiest to explain so that people understand it.
Yep. And the great thing about having a source or a backup plan of the pond in that example you gave is you probably didn't have a big investment in having this redundancy.
That's right.
That is something we have to consider because we don't have unlimited resources to spend on redundancies. So having some cheap options that can get us through a tough time, because again, you're probably not expecting that you would have to haul water from the pond indefinitely if it came to that.
No, that's right. I wouldn't want to do that all winter. Go down and have to chop a hole in the ice every day. I mean, that would be a real pain.
Yeah. Oh, just thinking about that gives me so much more, a lot of respect and admiration for the people who lived 200 years ago.
Oh yeah,
And they were tough
absolutely.
people.
You're right. Yeah. Well, it was survival. I mean, we kind of romanticize it, I think, looking back, but in reality, they were trying to survive. They were literally fighting for survival every single day of their lives, pretty much.
Mm.
Until they certainly got established and started to get, quote unquote luxuries. Uh, that's really what it was. It was, we need to get the basics to live another day kind of thing, or be able to live through a long winter type of mentality. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so you talked about supply chain disruption. There's more we could say on water, but I almost want to make water like its own show sometime.
Mm.
There's a lot to say about water. Now, maybe that's just me being a plumber. Maybe that I'm obsessed with water. But
you want to talk about your specialization here?
That's right. But
yeah,
because certainly, like, my setup doesn't help someone living in the middle of a big city. Someone in Toronto doesn't have a pond, doesn't have a well. They're very much more limited in what they're capable of having for resiliency. So they have to get a little more creative. But then we can make that its own show, because we could talk about water all night.
Yeah, talking about some specifics of food and water storage would be another fun episode. So we could definitely do that sometime. But
yeah, so yeah, what else? What other things would we likely face if we were?
Well, let's see. Storms are something we covered. Supply chain disruptions. What happens if the items you need don't show up to the store? Let's see. How about loss of work? I think that's
I was going to say, if we tie it back to the beginning of a problem so localized it only affects a single family, like the loss of a job, that is an emergency in a sense. So if you're storing things that you need when times are good, you can then draw on them. If times get tough.
So like if I lost basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a really good way of thinking about it. Actually, I've never thought of that, but that's a really good way of thinking about it.
Keep your battery topped up.
That's right. They actually said that in the Depression. Of course, where we lived, it's generally economically depressed all the time, and so people kind of laughed that in our area during the Great Depression, everyone was like, "Depression? What depression? This is just how it is all the time." But he's funny. Even my grandfather, I remember him talking about it, saying, we never ate so good as when I was a kid in the Depression. He said that was, you couldn't sell anything nobody wanted to buy anything. So he said, you just ate everything off the farm. He said, everybody ate great. He said, we had steak because nobody wanted to buy it. So we just ate it instead. It was that kind of mentality in a lot of places. But
so that's actually an interesting historical event to look at, because it sounds like people who were producing their own food fared pretty well. But I know the people who were working in industry, who weren't growing food, they were in rough shape. There were a lot of people who considered themselves lucky to have bread to live on.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. And that's where you saw, like, during World War II and all that sort of, you saw victory gardens and this sort of promoting this idea of everybody can take pressure off of the supply chain system by growing some of their own food and doing that sort of thing.
Yeah, growing food is definitely a skill people should practice, even if it's not on a huge scale.
That's right.
Do it enough that you're familiar with it. It's easier to scale up than to go from zero to anything at all.
Absolutely. And so many times I talk to people and they're just like, oh yeah, man, like, if I know how to grow a garden. I'd start a garden if, the economy collapsed and there was no food to buy. Like, hold on, you live in Canada. Like, you got maybe 4 months to grow food. Let's just hope your economy, the economy collapses in May, not January.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's certainly a skill that needs to be practiced. But
So I take it you wouldn't be recommending those survival seed buckets.
well, I actually don't have a problem with them as long as you're going to use them right away. Yeah,
Yeah. No, I think that's something we'd agree on. Buying one of those and putting it in the corner of your basement and expecting you can pull it out and start a garden from scratch when you need to. That doesn't sound like a very well thought out plan to me.
most seeds lose their viability within a few years. Like the germination rate gets so bad. Things like onions,
Mm.
you'll be lucky to get 2 years out of onion seeds.
Mm-hmm.
The viability of the seeds drops off so fast with certain varieties
Mm-hmm.
that yeah, it's definitely a bit of a weak link in the whole concept. You either are all in to even keep your seeds, or you're going to say, no, I'm going to be dependent upon, acquiring my seeds every year or every other year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely saw that. I've got 3 trays of onions and leeks under grow lights, and I think some of that seed was 2 years old, and definitely a poor germination rate on that. So
Yeah.
it's good. I mean, these are details where if you just have a bucket of
Yeah.
seeds, you don't understand. You've never had the experience, and I think
That's right.
experience to draw upon is one of the biggest things. It's like whether it's growing a garden or changing a tire. It's like, have you ever even tried to take a lug nut off a vehicle before? And is that going
That's
to
right.
leave you in a bind when you're in the middle of nowhere and suddenly need to change the tire to get out of there?
Yeah. Well,
So
I
it's
think this
little
needs to be
things.
another topic that we cover in more detail. But man, skills. Like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
skills are one of the greatest things you can do to prepare for any sort of emergency. Because there's a saying that in an emergency, people don't rise to the occasion. People
Mm.
are reduced to their training.
Yeah, they fall back on their training.
They're going to
Yep.
fall back to the lowest level of training that they have, well practiced. You see that with guys, shooters. When things get stressful, they do whatever they did to train.
Mm-hmm.
Like however they trained, that's what they fall back to. And if they trained poorly, it shows.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget the example in one of David Grossman's books. He talked about shooting under stress. Maybe I've told you this story before, but there was a history when they examined shootings of cops, like cops who died in shootouts on the job. They were noticing that a lot of these police officers, and this would have been back in like the 50s, 60s, I'm guessing,
Mm-hmm.
were they would have an empty gun and they have their hand full of empty casings in their pocket.
Wow.
And they were
I
like,
don't think
what is
I've heard of this.
they were like, what is going on here? Like, why is they were noticing this trend in the statistics of, because they would investigate every single one of
Mm-hmm.
these, incidents. And what they found was when these police officers were training at the range, because they were revolvers. So they,
Mm-hmm.
bang, 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 they were shooting 6 rounds. They were emptying the casings into their hand from their revolver.
Mm.
And then to save having to pick them up, they were putting them in their pocket. And then they were taking out their new, speed loader, putting it into the
Mm-hmm.
revolver and continuing with the training. Well, all of a sudden, when they get in an actual shooting and they were under extreme stress, they were following the same
Mm.
pattern of training, that mechanic of
Muscle
arms,
memory. Yeah.
the muscle memory, and they were in
Yeah,
the middle of a
absolutely.
gunfight. They were unloading the revolver into their hand and putting the shells in their pockets, and that was
So not a good
instead of
use of
just
time.
instead of just dumping them and getting bullets in, and they were
Mm.
getting killed on the job. So that's an example of under stress being reduced to however you trained.
Mm.
Just the
Yeah.
same as with other skills. If you don't have those skills, if it's a stressful environment, you're not going to have the time or wherewithal to necessarily figure it out on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
The stress is going to reduce you down to whatever you've already practiced and trained to do, whatever skills you have. So yeah, learn skills. There's I don't know if this, I should look this up. I don't know if this website is still out there. I think it was 13skills.com or something like that. It doesn't bring anything up. I might look that up if I can and put it in the show notes.
Maybe if we can find something and put it in the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah, because it was a website that basically it didn't really do too much to keep you accountable, but it was a way that you could sort of keep yourself accountable to learn 13 new skills every year.
Okay.
So it sort of had a calendar. Cool. You could go through and pick what skills you wanted to learn or improve on if you already had, sort of a basic knowledge of those skills. And it was a way to kind of keep yourself accountable and to help yourself learn new skills every year, so that you didn't become too specialized. I'll see if I can find that website. It's been a long time since I looked at it. I'll see if I can find that, and I'll throw it in the show notes for anybody who might be interested. So.
Yeah, that's good, because a little outside encouragement, and because even like a refresher of ideas and things you could try can really be inspirational, or at least give you a kick in the butt.
Yeah, sometimes you don't know what you don't know.
Get out there and do it.
Exactly.
So, I think that covers a lot of the things I wanted to hit on in talking about the basic overview of preparedness.
So much on the topic. Obviously, we're going to circle back to this topic a lot.
Yeah,
in a lot of shows.
Specific little segments would be cool.
That's right.
We want to give we want to give people an idea of what our mindset is, and it's really a pragmatic one. We want to be ready for the things that are likely to happen. Build good habits, build skills, have some supplies on hand for the difficulties you're going to face, and those are all things that you can end up adapting to a situation you didn't expect, but it lands in your lap, and it's like now you're not totally in the dark. You've already thought about reacting to some scenarios, so that makes you more adaptable, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And adaptability is probably one of the best things for helping you maintain a cool mindset under pressure. Knowing that you've adapted in the past, in particular, drawing on that experience.
Yeah.
A little bit of confidence, I think, goes a long way. Yeah. Desperation does lead people to do the impractical things, as you mentioned, taking the time to shove the cartridges in your pocket. So using time efficiently when you're in an emergency situation is definitely pretty vital.